Hi guys, so in this video we're going to run through the process of running ClimPACT2 on a Windows machine. And so on this computer I've got Windows 10, but the process will be really similar, if not the same, for earlier versions of Windows. And so here I'm assuming that you've got R installed on your computer. That's the only requirement for running ClimPACT2, that you have R installed on your computer. If you don't, there is another video on how to install R in Windows. Okay, so once you have R, the easiest way to get a copy of ClimPACT2 is to download one from the ClimPACT2 GitHub repository, which is this website here. And I'll put this website in the comments below. So once you're at this page, you just need to select the download zip button on the right hand side here, and that'll download a zip file to your computer. And so you can always come back to this website to get the latest version of ClimPACT2. Okay, I've already downloaded this to my desktop, which you can see here. So it downloads a ClimPACT2 master.zip file. All you need to do now is to extract that. I'm just going to extract it to my desktop. Yeah, that creates a folder, a ClimPACT2 master folder. Just have a quick peek in there, and you can see there's about a dozen files. These all constitute ClimPACT2. A couple of these are sample input files. There's also the user manual here. Okay. So the next step is to enter R. So you can see here I've installed R previously. So now I'm going to enter R. And the first thing we need to do in R is to tell it to change directory. You do that by selecting File and Change Dir. Then you just need to select the ClimPACT2 master folder that you just extracted. So mine's on my desktop. You might have extracted yours somewhere else. You just need to navigate to it here, select it, and say OK. And you'll see that nothing actually changes on this screen here. But what we just did tells R that we want to work inside that directory. Alright, so the next step, really the final step to opening up ClimPACT2 is just to source the climpact2.gui.r file. And we can do that because we've told R to move into that ClimPACT2 master folder. And in that folder is the climpact2.gui.r file. Alright, and so that's really it. Once you hit enter on this command, ClimPACT2 will open up. However, the first time you do this, the ClimPACT2 code will scan your installation of R and determine what R packages you have installed. And if it realizes that it needs to download and install some packages that you don't have, that it depends on, it'll go about doing that. So on this computer, since I've basically got a clean installation of R, when I press enter now, ClimPACT2 is going to download and install some packages that it needs. But this only happens once. It takes a minute or two, but it only occurs the first time you run ClimPACT2 on your machine. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so you can see here it's identified some packages it needs to get, and it's asking me to select a mirror or a server to download from. And it usually doesn't matter what server you pick. The closest one geographically is usually the quickest. If you select HTTP mirrors at the bottom and say OK, you get a longer list. So I'm going to pick Canberra. And you can see it going about downloading and installing those packages. And actually that's it. It's already downloaded and installed all of those packages. And actually ClimPACT2 has opened up. It's just been hidden down here in my taskbar. So you can see that here. So again, that only happens once, that process of downloading and installing those packages. So just to demonstrate, I'll exit this interface straight away. And if I run that source climpact2.gui.r command again, the ClimPACT2 interface will pop up immediately. So that's basically it. That's how you get to run ClimPACT2. So let's go through now and actually run through the two steps outlined here in ClimPACT2, just using the sample data that's distributed the zip file we just downloaded. So you can see here on the home screen there are two main steps to running ClimPACT2. The first is loading and doing some basic quality control checking on your data, and the second step is calculating the indices. So before we load and check the data, I'll just show you what the input data to ClimPACT2 looks like. So if I go back to my ClimPACT2 folder, and you see here there's a text file called climpact2.sampledata.1d time series. If we open that, you can see what the input to ClimPACT2 needs to look like. So it's just a simple ASCII file made up of 6 columns. And all of these, this file represents a daily time series of data for a specific site, for a specific weather station, for example. And each line represents a different day. So the first column represents the year, the second column is the month, the third column the day of the month, the fourth column is the precipitation on that day, the fifth column's the maximum daily temperature, and the sixth column is the minimum daily temperature. And you can see here for precipitation there are all these negative 99.9 values. This tells ClimPACT2 that there is missing data there. So if you don't have data for a particular day, you need to put in negative 99.9 to tell ClimPACT2 that that data is missing. But that's it. So we really recommend that you use this sample data file as a template to help you get your input data into the right format for ClimPACT2. Alright, let's close that and let's load that file into ClimPACT2. So when you click the load and check data button, you'll get a dialog box to pick your input file. We'll pick the sample input file. And you get this extra dialog box here. Okay, this just lets you enter some preferences for calculating the indices and some preferences for the quality control checks. So the first one is just the station name. By default it uses the file name that you've selected. The second row lets you enter the latitude and longitude of your particular site. And so this is actually important. For example, one of the indices uses the latitude to estimate incoming solar radiation. So be as precise as you can with this, but for this example I'll just enter anything. Third row lets you specify a base period. So most of the indices that ClimPACT2 calculates are based on thresholds. A lot of those thresholds are absolute thresholds. For example, the number of days where maximum temperature is above 25 degrees, for example, that's an absolute threshold. Some of those thresholds are percentile thresholds, though. For example, the number of days above the 90th percentile of maximum temperature. And so those percentiles are calculated using the base period specified here. And so by default it's 1971 to the year 2000. If your input data doesn't have this period in it, you need to change it. For example, if my input data file started only in 1980, I'll need to change this to 1980. But it is good to try and get at least 30 years for your base period. Okay, so the next row lets you specify the number of standard deviations that'll be used to identify temperature outliers in your input data. So as part of the quality control checking that ClimPACT2 conducts, it tries to identify any outliers in your temperature fields. And so here it's saying that it's that any daily temperature value that's greater than 4 standard deviations from the mean will be flagged in one of the output files as a temperature outlier, and you can change that if you like. The next button allows you to load thresholds that have been previously calculated. So instead of calculating thresholds like the 10th percentile or 90th percentile from this base period, if you've calculated thresholds previously, you can load them here. Most of the time you won't need to do this. Most people just want to calculate thresholds from the input data file that they've selected. So we're just going to leave that. And that's it for this step. So now we just need to select the process and quality control button. And this is really the longest part of running ClimPACT2. It can take a minute or two, depending on how big your data file is, but I don't think it'll take that long here. Okay, you can see it's complete, and it tells you to carefully evaluate output in the following directory for issues before continuing, and sends you here. I can't stress this enough. It's extremely important before you just calculate climate indices that you ensure that the data you're using as input has been vetted. Because especially since we're dealing with climate extremes, it's important that there aren't any outliers. And so it says refer to Appendix F in the ClimPACT2 manual for help in interpreting the files that are created in this directory. And that'll be the focus of another video. But yes, at the end of this step, it's important that you do this and assess the output here. So I'll just click Done. And now we can say OK. And you can see now that step 2 is highlighted here. So we've finished step 1. So I'll just show you that that process of loading and checking the data has created some folders. And the folder where the quality control output has been created is in the QC for quality control. And in all of these folders, there's one folder for each site. So if you ran ClimPACT2 again for 3 other sites, there'll be 3 more folders here. So you can see when ClimPACT2 loads and checks your data, it conducts some quality control checks and produces all of these PDF files and .csv files. And this contains information on potential quality control issues in your data. Again, refer to Appendix F of the manual, which you get when you download ClimPACT2 here. Okay, so just going back to ClimPACT2, let's now calculate the indices. Alright, you click that and you get an indices calculation dialog box. These are a bunch of parameter values you can alter that just relate to some of the indices that are calculated. You can leave these as default without doing any harm, but just to go through them very, very briefly. The first one is just the title for the plots that ClimPACT2 creates. Second one here allows you to select a time step for the indices. So some indices can be calculated monthly. Most of them are calculated annually, but some can be calculated monthly. And if you select a month, then those that can be calculated monthly will be calculated monthly. But I'm just going to leave it as annual. And here are a bunch of other parameters relating to some of the indices. For example, some thresholds that you can set for some of the indices. And you can refer to the manual to see exactly what all of these options let you do. At the bottom there's even an option to let you define your own index to some extent. But we're just going to leave all of this and say calculate indices. So if I go back to R, you can see that the indices are calculating. And it's completed. It says the plots are in this folder and the data are in this folder. So essentially, if we go back to our ClimPACT2 master folder, the plots are in the plots folder and the data are in the indices folder. So just quickly go to the plots folder. Again, there'll be a separate folder for each input file that you process in ClimPACT2. You can see here all of the plots that ClimPACT2 has made. So if I just choose one of these, for example, FDM2, the annual number of days when minimum daily temperature is below -2 degrees. You can see here the time series of this index. So it's just the station name, location, the actual index is in the subtitle, and the definition of that index. And here is the value for each year of that index. And you can see a linear trend is plotted, as well as the significance of that trend, as well as a smoothing curve. Alright, but more importantly than the plots, the actual data that's getting plotted is written into the indices folder. And again, there's a folder for our specific site. And so if we go to FDM2 again, It opens that CSV file just in spreadsheet software that you might have installed, or you can also open this in a text file, but it's easier to see in spreadsheet software. So you can see that it writes out into the file each of those values that get plotted for each year. So the value of FDM2, the FDM2 index for each year. Before it writes out the time series data, it also writes out some metadata, for example, the version of ClimPACT2 you're using, the date it was calculated. And there is also this extra column on the end here. So in addition to the actual indice value, there's also the normalized value, and this just might help with your analysis after calculating the indices. And so these values are normalized to all of the years available to ClimPACT2. Okay, but that's essentially it. We've just successfully run ClimPACT2 in Windows. Thanks very much for listening.